What's up everybody, welcome to my channel and to the start of this new mini-series where we're going to take a look at setting up a bit more advanced AI. So we're going to be using EQS, perception, behavior trees and blackboards. So for this turret we're only going to use perception and the behavior tree blackboard combination. And later in the series we're also going to set up some actual AI that can walk around and hide and things like that. And we're going to use EQS for them as well. So we're going to make sure all of the stuff replicates so you can use it in a multiplayer game, and it's also going to be really easy to migrate into any existing projects so you can use it in your own projects as well. If you like the channel, please take a look at the description. There's a link to my Patreon and to the Discord in there. Most of my project files are available for free, and if you want to get the exclusive project files, you can become a member of Patreon or YouTube, and then you will get access to premium channels in my Discord. So let's start building this turret, shall we? So here we are. I've created a default third-person project, but you can use any project that you like, to be honest. Just make sure it's a Unreal Engine 5.1 project, because the assets that we're downloading are currently not available in 5.2. Afterwards you can easily upgrade this project to 5.2 if you like, so that shouldn't be an issue. First of all, let's get all of the assets. So we're going to go to the marketplace, and these are Paragon assets. So we're going to use search for Paragon and then Agora. No. So like this, and then this should pop up. So this is a free asset pack. It's really big, to be honest. It's about 17 or 18 gigs. But we're going to do some asset management, so you will end up with a project about 2.5 gigabytes big. So to start, add this to your project, and I'll be back when this is done. So after we added it to the project, you will see something like this. So as I mentioned, we want to get rid of all of the assets that we're not going to use. So first of all, I'm going to create a new folder where we're going to add all of our turret stuff. So let's create a new folder in here, and I'm going to call this my game dev raw turret. First of all, let's go to the Paragon props folder, and in here we want the turrets folder and the FX folder. So we're going to grab both of those and we're going to move them into our own folder. So move here. This may take a little bit, so be patient while it completes the migration, and I'm going to pause the video. So here we are, we have the folders in place, and now we kind of want to get rid of all of the stuff that we're not using. So we could delete it in the editor, but that takes a really long time because it's going to look for all the references and stuff like that. So what I'm going to do is simply browse to the folder in the Windows Explorer, and in the meantime I'm going to close the project down just to be sure. So in this folder we can simply get rid of the stuff we don't need. So we're going to go to the content folder, and then we're going to grab the kite demo, the lighting folder and the Paragon props folder, and we can simply delete those. So let's get rid of them. There we go, and that should save us about 14 or 15 gigabytes. So now we can reopen the project and actually start working. So let me reopen it and I'll be back in a sec. So back in the project, and we can finally start doing some work. And so a little bit of explanation. I want to make a normal version of this turret first that doesn't replicate. And at the end of the series we're going to set up the replication so this will actually work in a multiplayer game. This is not something I always do in that way, but it kind of depends on what we're making, the complexity of the project, the amount of experience that you have with Unreal and replication. So it kind of depends on if you want to do it this way or not. Why I'm doing it for this turret is to clarify the difference between a normal and a replicated AI. So it's much clearer to show what needs to be replicated if I do it at the end, and it will make a bunch more sense. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to start by creating the actual turret blueprint with a bunch of empty variables, and we're going to use that to set up the animation blueprint that comes with the download. So first of all, let's create a new blueprint class and make that a character. So this is going to be my BP GDR turret. and let's open it up. So as I mentioned first, the only thing we're going to do is add a bunch of variables in here so we can set up the animation blueprint. So we want to add a few booleans to start with, and the first one is target inside. So that's bool, that's fine. Then we want another boolean, and that's is aiming. And a third boolean, and that's is firing. Then we need a bunch of other variables. So we're going to create the current target location. Current target location. So this is going to be a vector. And we also want the current target distance. So current target distance. And that's going to be a float. Then we need three more. The turret damage value. So turret damage value, and that's going to be a float as well, so that's fine. Then we want the play hit react animation. Play hit react animation. So this is going to be a boolean again. And the last thing that we need is the hit react animation variation. So we can kind of copy this and mess up the name a little bit. Hit react animation variation. And that's going to be an integer. So with this stuff in place, we can compile and save it and get rid of it for now. So we want to set up the animation blueprint. So we're going to go to the turrets folder, then turret inhibitors, animations, and if we scroll all the way down in here, we have the turret animation blueprint. So it's not really good to go. As you can see, the event graph is not set up and things like that. But if we take a look at the animation graph, that is actually set up. So we're simply going to use this animation graph. And I do need to make a few changes in here. So I kind of figured out how this worked just by trial and error and playing around with it a little bit. And we do want to make a few changes in here to make sure that it fits our needs. So that's what we're going to do first. So let's start in the event graph. And we're going to grab our blueprint initialize animation event. So if we go to functions, override, and then over here, blueprint initialize animation, this is what we want. And then we're going to right click and get the owning actor. So this is our BP turret, so we want to make sure this is valid first. So let's do that. And after we made sure that it's valid, we're going to cast it to our BP GDR turret. So drag over here again, cast to BP GDR turret, and hook it up to the isValid pin. So we want to promote this turret to a variable. So drag off, promote to variable, and that's my BP GDR turret. So I'm getting rid of the spaces in here, I don't like that. And then we need a few extra variables to add to our animation blueprint. So the first one is going to be the look at location. And that's going to be a vector. And then we also want to add the aim alpha, and that's going to be a float. So aim alpha, and turn that in a float. Then over here we have a variable called tower variation, and just to make things a little bit more clear, I'm gonna rename this to damage variation, because this doesn't actually is a variation for the turret, but this is only applied to the damage of the turret. So what we want to do now is drag off the turret and get the turret damage variation. So I didn't create that variable yet, I forgot one, so that's my bad. We want to go back to the turrets folder and open up our BP turret blueprint. And we also want to add that variable, so that's an integer, so we can copy this one and call this something like the turret damage variation. And then we can compile and save it and go back to our animation blueprint. So now we can get it in here in the event graph. So get turret damage variation. And we're going to store this inside of the damage variation, so not the hit variation. Plug it in here and hook it up here. So we only want to do this on the event initialize, so it only happens once, because as I mentioned, this is simply the different additive animation that we're choosing for this turret. So if we switch it around, it's going to change while we are damaging it, and that's not what we want. So we have the damage variation set up, and we want to make sure that all of the other variables are populated as well. And we're going to do that inside of the blueprint thread save update animation. So if we override a function in here and look for thread save update animation, click on this and it will be created for us. So in here we want to update all of our properties, and we're going to use the property access system. So first of all, let's set up the hit variation. Let's drag it in here as a setter, and then you want to drag off this pin and look for property access, so all the way at the bottom. And then because we promoted our GDR turret to a variable, we can access it in here and get all of the variables on the turret. So for this one, we want to get the hit react animation variation. So that's all the way down here, hit react animation variation. So you can simply click it and it will populate this node. So that's the hit variation. The next thing we need is the isHit boolean. So we're going to drag in a setter again, hook it up and look for property access. So we want to bind this to our play hit react animation boolean. So go to the turret again and look for play hit react animation and simply click it. The next two we need are the turret damage and the aiming boolean. So let's grab our turret damage and that's float over here. So turret damage, grab the setter again, connect it up, look for property access, and we're going to bind this to our turret damage over here. Simply select it and that should be good to go. No, that should not be good to go. That's the turret damage on the animation blueprint. So let me see, I'm not sure. Oh, here's my GDR turret, I'm sorry. So you want to go to the GDR turret, and in the GDR turret, you want to look for the variable that we created. So that's the turret damage value. That's the correct one. And make sure you hook it up. Next we needed is aiming. So let's grab the aiming bool and grab a setter. Again, we're going to use the property access. And simply look for the isAiming bool on the GDR turret and connect it like so. Now we want to grab a branch because depending on if we're aiming, we want to do some different stuff. So let's hook it up over here and let's do the true branch first. Why not? So in case we are aiming, we also need the distance to our target. So we're going to grab the distance to target float, hook it up to the true pin. And again, use the property access. So we're going to access our turret and get the distance to target from here. Current target distance. And the next thing is the look at location. So we also added that in the blueprint over here. So let's grab the look at location vector. And again, use property access to grab it from our character. So turret and then all the way down here. So this should be in here somewhere. Oh, here it is, current target location. So under properties. And that's good to go as well. Now for the aim alpha, we want to do a little bit different. So we're going to grab a branch, hook it up over here. And first of all, we're going to check our current aim alpha. So let's grab a getter. And for the getter, we want to make sure that it's less than 1. So let's look for a less than. And fill in 1 over here. That's our condition. So if the aim alpha is not 1 yet, we're going to make sure that it's going to be 1 by interpolating it. So we're going to grab the aim alpha as a getter and drag off here. And I'm going to look for interp to constant. So interp to. And we want the F_interp_to for a float, and then I'm going to use the constant value, so like this. And what we want as the target is 1. So we want to increase the aim alpha to 1 from the current value. We need to grab the delta time, and we can get it from the input node over here. So simply hook it up to the delta time. And then you can play around with the interp speed a little bit to smooth out the movement. So I'm going to make the speed 2, but you can change it a little bit if you like to. So then we're going to grab the setter for the aim alpha again. Make sure you hook it up to the true pin over here, and the return value is the new aim alpha. So that should be like this. And after that, we want to grab a second branch, and we're going to hook up the false pin directly to this branch and the aim alpha setter as well. So in this branch, we're going to check if we are aiming or not. So we can simply grab our isAiming boolean over here and hook it up. And after that, if we are aiming, let me see, this was isAiming, right? Yeah, so that should be good. So if we are aiming, we want to grab the open shield and the open panel booleans. So open shield and open panel. And we're going to hook those up to the true and the false pin. And if it's true, we're going to enable them. And if it's false, we're going to disable them. So make sure for true, you set them to enabled, like so. And then the last thing we want to do is set our isFiring boolean. So we want to grab it over here as a setter again, drag it in here, and simply use the property access to get it from our character. So GDR turret, and over here we have isFiring. So hook it up like this. So that's the true branch, and now we also want to set up the false branch. So let's go back to the first branch over here where we check if we are aiming. And in this case, we only want to check the aim alpha. So let's grab a branch, and we're going to get the current aim alpha and make sure that it's greater than 0. So look for a greater than and simply leave it at 0. Plug it into the condition. So if it's greater than 0, we want to interpolate it back to 0. So we're going to grab the aim alpha and drag off here, look for interp to constant. So that's the F_interp_to. Our target is 0, so that's good to go. The delta time, we can grab it over here. And again, the interp speed, you can play around with it. For this one, I'm using 0.5. There we go. So we need to store this in our aim alpha. So let's grab a setter and hook it up to the true pin. Nah, that's fine. So that should be good to go. And now we can simply hook up both of these branches to the branch over here. So simply grab the false pin, hook it up to the branch over here, and also the setter for the aim alpha. And that should be good to go. So this is our update, thread safe update animation, and all of these variables will drive our animation blueprint. Now, as I mentioned, we also need to make a few small changes inside of the animation graph. So let's do that as well to make sure that everything's working the way we want to. So we're going to go to the animation graph, and we're going to start at the beginning over here. So the defense offense states, we don't really need to mess around with them. If we go a little bit lower, we have the pitch aim offsets, and we do want to change a little bit in here. So we want to flip these bools around. So we're simply going to grab the true pose, hook it onto the false pose, and the other way around. So the open panel bool in here is fine. That should be good to go. Then we want to go to the right a little bit. And over here, there's actually not a boolean hooked up to the value. So we're going to make sure that for this one, we're going to grab our isAiming bool and hook it up over here. isAiming. Then for this, we don't need to change anything. No, the additive flare, that's good to go. So then we want to go down a little bit over here to the look at controls. And we're going to change this up a little bit as well. So for this, we're going to use our variables. So let's disconnect this for now. We're going to grab our look at location and simply hook it up over here to both of the nodes. And we also want to grab our aim alpha and simply hook that up to the alpha for both of the nodes. And then if we select these nodes, we want to go to the interpolation type over here and set it to linear. And the interpolation time, I'm going to set it to 1 second. So this will smooth things out a little bit. So those settings apply to both of these nodes. Interpolation linear, interpolation time 1 second, and the rest should be good to go. Then if we go down a little bit, we have these bone-driven controllers, and again we have this aiming bool that drives them. So we want to get rid of the aiming bool and simply plug in our aim alpha for both of them. So that will smooth things out a little bit. The bool can only be 0 or 1, and the aim alpha, we're interpolating it, so that's a bit smoother. After that, we want to add a small correction to the aiming. So I'm going to make a little bit of room in here and drag off this node and look for a transform modify bone. Oh, really? Transform modify bone, so this one, and simply hook it up first. So what we want to do for this node is change our gun slide. So if we select the node over here, the bone to modify, we can select the gun slide, this bone. And then we're gonna set the rotation mode to add to existing. So for rotation mode, add to existing. The rotation is actually in bone space. So let's set it to bone space in here. Translation, we're going to ignore it, and then over here for the rotation, we're simply going to add 4 to the y-axis, so 4, and that's all we need to do. No, we also want to hook up the alpha, by the way, so let's hook up the alpha to the aim alpha as well. So this will make it aim a little bit better with the variables that we're using. So we're nearly done in the animation graph. The only thing we want to do is go into the recoiling state machine. So if we go to the left a little bit, we have the recoiling state machine. You can double click it. And then in here we have, let me see which one we want. The recoiling to, oh sorry, the no recoil to recoil. So that's this one, the upper. What's this called again? The transition rule. So we're going to open this one up, and in here we only want to use the is firing bool, so we don't care if we are aiming. We simply want to hook up our is firing as a condition in here and get rid of those, and that should be good to go as well. So now we should have a working animation graph for the purpose that we want to. So let's compile and save it, and we're gonna start setting up our character a little bit further. So let's go back to our turret character, and in here we're gonna set up the capsule component and the mesh component. So first of all, let's select our capsule component, and we want to change the collision a little bit. So scroll down to the collision and extend the presets. So instead of the pawn preset, I'm going to use custom. So from pawn go to custom, it will keep these settings, and then I'm going to set the camera to ignore and world dynamic to ignore. So that's to make sure that our projectiles later will not hit the capsule component, but the actual mesh component. So that's good to go. Then we can go to our mesh, and we want to set up the turret mesh. So let's select one in here. There's a few different variations. It doesn't matter which one you choose, all of them should work. So let me just pick one, and that's good to go. Now these turrets are really big, so you do want to scale them down, to be honest. So I'm going to go to the scale for the mesh, and I'm going to make it 0.4 on all 3 axes. So again, you can play around with these values. But I think this is a decent size. You can make it a little bit smaller, but you do have to adjust the scaling for the FX a little bit later then as well, so keep that in mind. For the animation mode, we're going to use an animation blueprint, and we want to select our turret blueprint, so that's our turret AnimBP over here. And then we also need to set up the collision capsule. By the way, I forgot the size for that. So we want to select the capsule, and then I'm going to use 120 by 110. So the height is 120 and the radius is 110. And then we can grab the offset for the mesh, and that's going to be minus 120 on the z-axis. So location minus 120. And that should pretty much be good to go. So now we can actually place this turret in the level, and it should play our spawn animation. So it won't really do anything besides that, but let's just make sure that this is working. So we're going to grab a viewport and simply drag in our turret over here. So let's rotate it in the right direction. There we go. And now we can actually have a really quick testing here. So let's save everything and hit play. And obviously it's starting on my other monitor. So now if we enter the level, oh really? So it's having a really hard time with this for some reason. I'm not sure why, but if you enter the level, it should play the spawn animation, and it should also freaking really. And it should also play the idle animation. So I'm not sure why my PC is having so much trouble with this. Well, I'm gonna restart after this video to make sure it's all smooth again. So we have the basic setup, and what we want to do next is set up the controller for the turret so we can add perception and make sure that that's set up correctly as well. So let's right click and go to a blueprint class, and we're going to search in all classes for the AI controller. So that's the equivalent of our player controller, but for AI obviously. So we're going to select the normal AI controller and create that one. So this is going to be my BP GDR turret controller. There we go. So if we have this created, we want to go to our character again, and then in the class defaults we want to look for the pawn settings. So if we scroll down a bunch, let me see. So that's over here under the pawn. We want to grab the auto possess AI and make sure that we set it to placed in world or spawned. And for the AI controller class, we're going to assign the AI controller that we just created. So BPGDR turret controller, compile and save, and that's good to go. Then we can move this to the side, and we're actually going to go into our DefaultGame.ini to set up the perception. So let me clarify this. So we're going to use a perception component in here that's going to use sight, and all of the actors that are inside of this turret will be registered. So we want to make sure that we're only registering the actors that actually can be seen by this turret and that we want information from. So for example, other enemies we don't care about because we don't want to shoot at them. So we're going to make sure that we are only registering the player character with our sight sense, and we're going to ignore all of the other characters and actors in the game. And to do that, we actually need to make a small change in our DefaultGame.ini file. So we're going to close this down, make sure that everything is saved. And let's go to our project folder in the Windows Explorer. Get rid of the project. So in here we want to go to our config folder and then open up the default game.ini, so not default engine but default game. And inside here we want to add two simple lines. So I'm going to paste them in the description of the video as well, so you can simply copy and paste them. But this is what you want to add in here. So script AI module, AI send site, auto register all pawns as source, false. So that's all we need in here. We can save our default game.ini and get rid of it again, and then restart the project. So project is back up and running, and now we can go into our turret controller, and in here we're going to add the perception component. So we're going to add a new component and look for perception and simply add AI perception in here. So we want to select it, and then on the right side we can set up the perception senses. So for this turret we're only going to use the sight sense. So let's go to the sense config and click the little plus sign over here, and then in the drop down we can select our sight config. Then we can expand that, and in here we have all of the settings for our sight. So I'm gonna reduce the radius a little bit because this is just a really small map, so it's easier to test. So the first one is 2000 and the second one is 1500. Then you also want to make sure, and this is an important one, that you go to the detection by affiliation and simply enable all three of them. So we cannot expose this in blueprints, so we simply have to make sure we have all three enabled, so it will register all of them. And that's really all we need to do in here. So we can compile and save this. And now we need to make sure that we tell this perception component that our character that we're using is actually important and needs to be registered. And we're going to do that with the perception stimuli component. So we can get rid of the turret controller, and now you want to go to the actual character that you're using in your project. So in this case I'm going to the third person character, and we're going to add a component in here as well. And if you look for perception, then you have the AI perception stimuli source component. So you want to get this component added to your character. And with the component selected on the right side, you want to make sure that you auto register as source, enable this one. And for the senses in here, again, you're going to click the plus sign and select the sight sense. So this will make sure that this character will be registered by the sight sense of our controller. So we can compile and save that one. And the best thing we can do right now is make sure that this is actually working. So we have a nice little tool inside of the engine that we can use. If we go to edit and then project settings. So on the left side over here, you want to go to the gameplay debugger. And for me, this apostrophe key does not work, so I need to rebind it, but that probably depends on your keyboard or your PC, I'm not sure. But I'm going to rebind it so we can actually use it. So I'm going to set it to my numpad, but it doesn't really matter. And with that setup, we can actually go into the level. So let's hit play. And now if we hit the keybind that we just set, you will get the gameplay debugger, and in the top left of the screen you will have different options that you can enable and disable by pressing the number key. So our perception is set on number 5, so if we press number 5 you will see this pop up, and if you did everything correctly, the character should have this green orb around him whenever he's inside range of the turret. So if we go out of sight, you can see that's the last place where the turret saw me. And this purple square circle over here is actually the sight range, and the green circle over here is the loose sight range. So if I go out of this green circle, then it should stop seeing me as well. So yeah, that's just to make sure that I think I messed up the ranges, because the purple one should actually be on the inside. So let's go to the turret controller, AI perception. Yeah, I messed up this one. So the sight radius is 1500 and the loose sight radius is 2000. So the loose sight radius is always bigger than the sight radius, otherwise it doesn't really make sense. So if we go back in game and look at it again, so the green one is where it starts spotting me, and if it already saw me, it can still see me until I leave the purple one, and over there it will stop seeing me. So that's how it should work, and if you walk into the green circle again, it will start registering. So if that's working, you actually set up the site correctly, and then we can continue in the next video by actually making some code in here. So hope you enjoyed the video. It was a pretty much a setup video. We didn't really do anything exciting yet, but we just needed to get this out of the way. So I just do everything in one video, and from the next video we're gonna start setting up the actual site perception and make sure that our turret is behaving accordingly.